Anyways, let's watch this.
Things. It has been a show I've watched for years, and I consider myself to be a huge fan of it, but something happened on Christmas night that I find to be inexcusable. For a show that has a massive fan base surrounding it, somehow they were able to take what should be the bulk of the season and turn it into a messy, poorly paced jumble of multiple plot lines that ruins all emotional emphasis it was trying to bring. I gave this a pass when I first watched it. I brought it up a few times to my friends, but I still tried to get myself to look past it, and sure, this season is building up to what could be a crazy finale and possibly the best episode of the show, but at what cost? Sacrificing all of Volume 2 to draw more hype to everything it has to solve in the final episode? This would not be a big problem if Stranger Things Season 6 is coming, but it's not. Stranger Things has dug itself into a hole, or should I say wormhole, that doesn't seem to know exactly how to manage a story of this scale when it was able to do other large and more focused A, B, and sometimes C plots very well and to massive success. Stranger Things is not losing the plot. The plot is good, and of course that's subjective to people's taste, but bad pacing will drag down a brilliant concept, and it seems Stranger Things has shot itself in the foot when it comes to this. So let's talk about how pacing is ruining Stranger Things. Make sure to like, comment, hype, join my Discord server, and subscribe if you want a full breakdown of Stranger Things Season 5 once the finale releases. I normally don't post on any other day besides Wednesday, but Wednesday is the finale, and I need to say my piece before it releases because pacing is more important than it sounds. What is pacing, though? Sure, you know what writing is, directing the writing onto the big screen, but pacing plays a big part in how directors direct. And somehow, I'd argue the directors did not do justice in episode 5 and 6, and I promise I will talk about 7 on its own soon. Pacing is how a show like this is structured and how it should be able to let a scene go on from one scene to the next seamlessly by letting it take its time and keep a consistent pace, almost like it's jogging. Now, with Shock Jock episode 5, I think the beginning of it is pretty good. It starts directly where the previous one ended, but its main issue comes when all the characters start going off and doing different things. For example, in this episode, it has a total of 6 different plot lines going on all in one episode. And here's how I found that out. I went through the entire episode a second time, finding every part of the plot that is different from the others. We start the episode off with our first one where it follows up on the events of the last volume, where it mainly consists of Mike, Joyce, and Will, but it also involves Murray, Robin, and Lucas all in separate places, but because it's part of one big thing, I'm classifying it as its own. Our second is when we move on to the Mr. What's-It plot again, but this time all of the kids. It's more aftermath, but soon turns into its own story. After the title card, we get Eleven, Callie, and Hopper in the Upside Down after they escape the military, and because the military is only in this beginning scene, I'm not going to count it because there is no emphasis on it throughout episode 5 and 6. Our first plot line connects all of its characters in one room before moving on to our fourth with Nancy, Jonathan, Steve, and Dustin exploring Hawkins Lab, but what used to be its own thing in the previous episode becomes two, as Nancy and Jonathan, plot 4, go one way, and Steve and Dustin, plot 5, go another, arguably splitting the focus. We then go back to the Mr. What's-It plot, and it splits into two with the actual Mr. What's-It kids, and Max, Holly, and kinda Derek being two separate things that take place in the same mind. The only reason why I'm not splitting these up and not making them one big one is because Derek does go and do other things with the rest of the kids and Henry, so this makes 6. And may I just say, all of this takes place in the first 18 minutes and 30 seconds and lasts until the end of the episode.
Computer and information science is the backbone of everything that we use today.
That's
why I came
Can we
to
watch
UCPI.
the,
Accelerated to...
Thank you.
To clear things up, I am not going to count 8 talking to 11 about her past because technically this is still part of the same thing with Hopper. He's just absent in these moments. And I'm also ignoring, for now, when we split again where some of the crew goes after Schmookums and some stay behind to electrocute the Demogorgon. I'm not counting this because we don't see Erica and Murray again in the episode, but this will come back in episode 6. So to talk about Escape from Camazotz, we start with the 2 plot lines right off the bat. Steve and Dustin and Nancy and Jonathan. Sure, they are trying to reunite, but they both do their own things throughout the rest of the episode, as Steve and Dustin try to get back to them and Nancy and Jonathan try not to die. Then we are introduced to a new plotline where Murray and Erica find Schmookums. I know some will argue that this is only one scene they are in together throughout the entire episode, but because this is technically its own branch of the story, I'm calling it another plotline already, leaving us at 3 before the title card even starts. Schmookums' plotline counts, and the military doesn't because the military portion of it wasn't starting anything new. It was just showing that 8, 11, and Hopper have escaped, whereas Schmookums is is directly leading into a new thing they need to solve, even if they
Indian
don't
girl
come back
was
in this
too.
episode. We are then brought back to 8, 11, and Hopper, which makes 4 plot lines before the title card. But after that, at the 20-minute mark, it becomes combined with the first plot line we talked about in Shock Jock. We're also reintroduced to our 2 inside of Vecna's mind so far, coming at 6 plot lines. We then split the Will story from everyone else, as he has another role he plays in this as a spy for Vecna, where he stays for most of the episode, which makes 7 so far. The reason why this isn't connected to the rest of the L, Mike, and everyone else at the radio station is because we flash back to Will being held captive in that same place 4 separate times. And they seem to really nail this into our heads because Vecna says his one last timeline 2 out of the 4 times we go back to that same place. We then branch off even more with Robin and Lucas going to the hospital. For a second, Robin and Lucas are doing 2 different things before coming back together really quick, so I'm not going to count it as 2, but I'm going to count it as 1 more, leading to 8
I'm not gonna lie,
total.
Robin's
For the
pretty
rest of the
annoying as
episode,
well.
we bounce back and forth
Spit.
between some of these, but even
I
if
know
we
a lot
don't
of
count
people
Erica
like
and
it,
Murray,
but,
we still have 7, which is more than Shock Jock. Before we get into episode 7, aka The Bridge, I need to talk about how ridiculous it is to have so many plot lines going at the same time. Sure, both episodes are over an hour long, but geez, it just keeps cutting back and forth from one monologue session to another without taking priority in one of them. What angers me most actually comes from Escape from Camazotz, which is easily the most frustrating episode of the season so far. And that's because we learn in the first 6 minutes what the Upside Down actually is, and it's this huge twist that the more you think about it makes a lot of sense, but then they just don't talk about it for the rest of the episode. I think that although stupid how uninterested the plot is in looking more into that huge twist, it makes sense because who else is Steve and Dustin going to tell? They're basically all alone throughout this episode as they repair their friendship, which I must say is one of the highlights of the whole episode. What angers me
Also,
more,
they
though,
did
is the
talk.
more time a scene spends on a character without switching perspectives is exactly 8 minutes and 6 seconds long with Nancy and Jonathan's talk, starting at 41 minutes and 34 seconds into the episode and ending at 49 minutes and
It was
40
really
seconds.
that long.
Now, although you may argue, I must be crazy to be pointing out a scene like this because it's so touching, Enchanted. What do you hate, straight people or something, you bastard? Although I won't criticize the concept
Hey.
of the scene because it should be touching, but compared to everything we've seen, it's extremely out of place and out of left field when you realize the average cut in these episodes happens around 2 to 3 minutes. 8 minutes for one scene is horrifyingly long because you get used to how fast-paced it feels, and then you get hit with this really long scene that, although has good intentions of actually letting the characters breathe, it ruins the entire pacing of the episode. The pacing was already butchered by how many plot lines there are in these 2 episodes, but all the emotion that could have come from the scene is lost when, admittedly, you lose interest in this supposedly heartfelt breakup because it drags on for so long compared to everything else. Shock Jock I can at least give a little pass to because there are so many plot lines and so many cuts back to back
Wait
to
a
back to
minute.
back, but
Am I moving in slow motion? Am I moving in slow motion? As soon as I pause it, it stops. Bro, shut up! It stops. Bro, shut up! Stop. Bro, shut up! Shut up! Hold on. Wait. Something ain't right. Wait. Something ain't right. You can hear it on the thing.
at least it wasn't stupid enough to break its consistently fast-paced editing. Either way, though, these 2 episodes ruin any sort of emotional emphasis due to how fast-paced it is. And although it's easy to lock into Stranger Things when you start the episode, it's hard to lock in and remember equally for 8 different parts of the plot that are happening at the same time. Now, to move on to episode 7, aka the Talk of the Town, and the lowest rated episode of this season, and the second lowest episode of the show based on IMDb reviews, I must admit that I rewatched this episode in its entirety after release, and I think this is easily the most competently made episode of all of Volume 2, because the pacing is fixed. But
it's incredibly difficult to get aid into Gaza right now. There's always, unfortunately, more people in need than we can possibly reach with the resources that we have. The biggest one right now is water. People not getting enough water over the course of a week. Desalination plants are not fully functional, and then there is
this is easily the most competently made episode of all of Volume 2 because the pacing is fixed. But coming off the lightning round that was episode 5 and 6, I can understand why episode 7 can be a snooze at times. The pacing was so abysmally breakneck in the first 2 episodes that it makes episode 7 feel even longer when we actually have characters interacting for longer than a couple seconds. The reason I say this is the most competently made is because on my rewatch, it's much easier to enjoy and go with the flow because there aren't any fast-paced edits. And finally, a lot of these plotlines come together and are working alongside each other equally for most of the episode, specifically at the end. But come on, most people watched all 3 of these episodes back to back to back. So the whiplash you have from episode 5 and 6 really make episode 7 drag, and I don't think I need to tell you how bad that is for a penultimate episode of a show. I don't think I would have made this video if the bridge had the same pacing as episode 5 and 6, but for some reason everyone is blaming episode 7 for the show turning sour, when it is 100% shock and Escape from Camazotz butchering the season's plot. Obviously there is a huge reason why the bridge is also widely hated, and that's because Will said, "I don't like girls," and although I'd never be able to change people's mind about that, even if I tried, stop and smell the roses, people. You are blaming the wrong episode for something that was trying to return to normal. And although sure, I don't think The Bridge is a great penultimate episode, at least it sets up everything we possibly need to know before going into the finale. And if the finale is as rushed as Volume 2 was, I wouldn't be surprised if we all turn on Stranger Things just like we turned on Squid Game earlier this year. Speaking of the end of the year, this is my final video 2025, and I hope you enjoyed. I really do want Stranger Things to succeed, and I will happily take down this video if somehow the finale sticks the landing so well that it justifies Volume 2. But I didn't want to fret from saying what I want before the series comes to an end. Have a happy new year, everybody. I'm Enchanted. Bye.
Well, that was a letdown. Okay,